Kale stood in the briefing room of the Galactic Coalition Military Academy, watching the holographic display flicker with footage from the last human engagement. The other Varan officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. On screen, human soldiers pushed through enemy fire that would have sent any other species retreating. Some were wounded. They kept moving anyway. "This is why we don't volunteer for the Human Integration Program," whispered Kale's mentor, Elder Thane. His gray skin looked paler than usual. "They fight like they have nothing to lose." But Kale had already made the decision. Someone from their species needed to understand these strange allies. Someone needed to learn why humans won battles they should lose. The Varan people prided themselves on knowledge, on understanding. How could they claim wisdom if they feared to learn? The Academy approved the transfer within a week. Kale suspected they were simply relieved someone had volunteered at all. The transport to the human training facility took 6 days. Kale spent most of that time reading reports, trying to prepare. Human casualties were 3 times higher than any other coalition species. Yet their military grew stronger each year. It made no sense. Most species avoided war after experiencing its costs. Humans seemed to lean into it. The human base was loud. That was Kale's first impression. Machinery roared. Soldiers shouted. Somewhere, weapons fire echoed from a practice range. Varan facilities were quiet, efficient, calm. This place felt like controlled chaos. "Officer Kale?" A human approached, shorter than Kale expected, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to measure everything. "Corporal Han Junho. I'll be your squad leader." Kale tried to match the human gesture of a handshake. Han's grip was firm, but not crushing. Professional. "Let me introduce you to the team." Han led Kale through the base. The other soldiers stared, but not with hostility. Curiosity, mostly. Some nodded in greeting. The squad gathered in a small ready room. 5 humans, all young, all watching Kale with those sharp eyes. "This is Park Doyun and Choi Minho, our rifles." 2 men nodded. Doyun was tall and lean. Minho broader, with a scar across his jaw. Lee Ji-woo, combat medic. A woman with tied-back hair and steady hands. And Kim Tae-young, heavy weapons. The largest of them, carrying equipment that looked too heavy for his frame. "Welcome to the squad," Ji-woo said. Her voice warm. "Don't worry, we don't bite." "Usually," Minho added with a slight grin. Kale spent the first week observing. The humans trained constantly. Not just combat drills, but scenarios that seemed designed to break them. They practiced shooting while exhausted. They practiced treating wounds while under simulated fire. They practiced making decisions with incomplete information and no support. Other coalition species trained to execute plans. Humans trained for when plans failed. On the 8th day, Kale watched Ji-woo run a medical drill that made them uncomfortable. She had been awake for 36 hours. The instructors kept adding complications. Multiple casualties. Equipment failures. Enemy contact. She moved through it all with shaking hands but clear focus. When it ended, Ji-woo sat on the ground, breathing hard. Kale approached carefully. "Why do they make you train like this?" Kale asked. "It seems cruel." Ji-woo looked up, wiping sweat from her face. "Because the enemy won't wait until I've had rest. People will be bleeding regardless of how tired I am. Better to learn my limits here than discover them when lives depend on me." Han joined them, carrying water bottles. "In our military, we have a saying. Train hard, fight easy. Train easy, fight hard. We choose our difficulty. But the cost," Kale said. "Your casualty rates are so high. How do you accept this?" Han was quiet for a moment. "We don't accept it. We prepare for it. There's a difference. Every human who joins knows the risks. We train like this so that when the worst happens, we can still function, still complete the mission, still bring our people home. Over the following weeks, Kale began to notice patterns. Humans didn't just drill individual skills. They drilled teamwork under stress. They practiced communication when everything was going wrong. They trained their minds as much as their bodies. During one exercise, the squad was ambushed in a training scenario. Kale froze, overwhelmed by the chaos. Within seconds, the humans had formed a defensive position. No one panicked. They called out contacts, coordinated fire, Pullydale to cover. All without explicit orders from Han Dot. When the exercise ended, Kale's hands were still shaking. First time under fire, even simulated, is always rough, Doyen said, sitting beside Kale. You did fine. Didn't run, didn't shut down completely. That's better than some. How do you stay calm? Kale asked. Doyen shrugged. We're not calm. We're just trained to act despite the fear. Fear is information. It tells you there's danger, but it doesn't get to make decisions. We train until the right responses become automatic. Then fear can scream all it wants. Our bodies know what to do. That night, Kale recorded observations for their report to Varan Command. Humans, they wrote, do not train to avoid fear. They train to function within it. They build systems that work when individuals fail. They prepare for worst cases as their baseline. Expectation. The recommendation at the end was simple. If humanity ever becomes an enemy, surrender immediately. Because these people had built an entire culture around refusing to quit, around continuing when any rational analysis said stop. They had weaponized stubbornness itself. Kale watched through the window as the squad ran night drills in the rain. They were laughing somehow, even as they struggled through mud and obstacles, finding joy in shared misery. For the first time, Kale felt something close to fear. Not of the humans themselves, but of what they represented. A species that had looked at war's horror and decided the answer was to become better at enduring it. To make trauma survivable through preparation and brotherhood. The deployment orders came the next morning. Real combat. A frontier colony under attack. Kale was about to learn if human training methods actually worked. Deep down, they already suspected the answer. The humans weren't preparing for battle. They were preparing for something worse. And they seemed almost eager to prove they could handle it. That eagerness, more than anything else, should have warned Kale what was coming. The transport shuddered as it descended through the atmosphere. Kale gripped a safety harness, watching the human squad check their equipment one final time. No one looked nervous. If anything, they seemed more relaxed than during training. First deployment? Tang asked, his large frame somehow folded into the seat beside Kale. Yes, you? My fourth. He was 19 years old. 4 combat deployments at 19. Gets easier. Not the fighting, just the waiting before it. The planet below was called Haven's Gate. The name felt wrong now. The Haas Collective had invaded 3 weeks ago. Half the colony was evacuated. The other half was trapped behind enemy lines. Coalition forces were trying to hold the evacuation zones while rescue operations continued. The briefing had been clear. Expect chaos. Expect civilians in danger. Expect the Hask to use terror tactics. Nothing could have prepared Kale for the reality. They landed at dusk. The evacuation zone was a nightmare of noise and fear. Thousands of civilians from a dozen species crowded the transport areas. Children cried. Parents searched desperately for lost family members. The air smelled of smoke and something worse. Squad on me, Han called. His voice cut through the chaos. We're assigned to the eastern perimeter. Reports of Hask probes testing our defenses. We hold the line. No one gets through. The defensive position was a hastily constructed barrier of rubble and prefab shields. Other coalition forces were already there. Kale recognized Antari shock troops and Gorian regulars. Both species were considered elite warriors, but as night fell and the first attacks came, Kale saw the difference between elite and experienced. The Hask didn't attack in organized waves. They struck at random points, testing, probing, withdrawing before effective countermeasures could deploy. And they brought psychological weapons. Speakers blared across the battlefield. Screams, pleas for help. Sounds designed to break morale. The Zentari began to fracture after the third hour. Their formation discipline, so perfect in training, wavered. Some became too aggressive, pushing forward into ambushes. Others became too cautious, abandoning positions too quickly. The humans simply became quieter. Kale watched Han's squad settle into a rhythm. They didn't react to every probe. They picked their shots carefully. Conserved ammunition. Rotated positions so no one stayed in the most dangerous spots too long. Contact northeast, 200 meters, Minho called out. His voice was calm, factual. Confirmed, Diane responded. 3 hostiles. No heavy weapons visible. Hold fire, Han ordered. Let them come closer. Jiwoo, ready smoke if they push. The discipline was unnatural. Enemies were approaching, yet no one fired. The tension stretched. Kale's hands trembled on their weapon. Now, Han said quietly, 3 shots. 3 targets down. The remaining Hask scattered. Ammo check, Han ordered. Minho, you're getting low. Swap with Taeyong's reserve. They functioned like a single organism. Each human knew what the others needed before words were spoken. Training had made them a system that worked even under stress. Around midnight, the broadcasts changed. No longer generic screams. Now they were specific. Names. Personal messages from captured civilians, begging their families to surrender. To tell the coalition forces to withdraw. Kale saw several Gorian soldiers break. They simply sat down, weapons lowered, overwhelmed by the psychological assault. It was too much. How could you fight when the enemy used innocents as weapons? But the humans didn't break. Something else happened. They became focused in a way that made Kale's skin crawl. Not angry, not scared. Something colder, more dangerous. They're trying to make us feel helpless, Jiwoo said. She was checking her medical supplies, hands steady. It won't work. We've trained for this. How? Kale asked. How do you not react to that? Minho looked over from his position. We react. We just control how. Every scream we hear? That's information. It tells us prisoners are alive. It tells us the Hask position. It tells us we have a mission beyond just holding ground. We're going to get those people back. But we can't do that if we break now. During a quiet moment, Minho moved to sit beside Kale. He pulled out a small photo, protected in a worn case. My grandmother, he said. She survived a war when she was young. Lost everything. She taught me something. In Korean, we say pilsa juk sang. It means desperate to live, certain to die. But desperate to die, certain to live. Kale didn't understand. It means when you're too focused on survival, fear makes you weak. But when you accept you might die, when you're willing to die for something important, you become stronger. Paradox, right? But it works. The eastern perimeter held through the night. Barely. By dawn, ammunition was low. Everyone was exhausted, and casualty reports from other sections were grim. But the line hadn't broken. That's when Kale learned another human trait. When other species would rest after such a night, the humans immediately began improving their position. Reinforcing weak points. Redistributing ammunition. Preparing for the next attack. Don't you need to sleep? Kale asked Doyan, who was filling sandbags despite having been awake for 20 hours. I'll sleep when I'm confident in our defenses, he replied. Besides, I'm running on adrenaline still. Might as well use it productively. The second night was worse. The Hask changed tactics. They hit hard at the northern perimeter, drawing reinforcements. Then struck at the east, where defenses were thinned. The defensive line collapsed. Not completely, but enough. Enemies poured through gaps. Hand-to-hand fighting in the darkness. Chaos and screaming and the wet sounds of violence. Kale froze when a Hask soldier rushed their position. Every instinct screamed to run. To hide. Doyon was there. His weapon came up. 3 shots center mass. The hostile dropped. Stay down. He shouted at Kale, then returned fire with one hand while pulling Kale behind better cover with the other. The fighting was brutal and close. Kale saw things that would haunt them. Jiwoo treating a wounded Zentari soldier while under fire, her hands steady even as rounds impacted nearby. Taeng Hong holding a position alone when his section was overrun, his heavy weapon chattering until reinforcements arrived. Han making impossible decisions about where to send his limited people. When dawn came again, the Hask withdrew. The perimeter had held. Barely. The cost was high. Coalition forces had taken 40% casualties. Some units had ceased to exist. Han's squad was intact. Wounded, exhausted, but functional. How? Kale asked. The word came out broken. How are you all still human? Jiwoo asked. She was cleaning blood off her hands. Some of it was hers. Because we choose to be. Every day, every fight, we choose. The moment we stop choosing, we lose more than the battle. We lose ourselves. Han gathered the squad as medical personnel moved through treating the wounded. Good work, he said simply. Rest while you can. This isn't over. Taya realized then that the humans weren't fearless. They were terrified. But they had learned to function within terror. To make it fuel rather than paralysis. They had turned fear into another tool, and that somehow was more disturbing than fearlessness would have been. The counteroffensive was supposed to be simple. Push through the Hask lines, relieve a trapped garrison, establish a supply corridor. Coalition Command had assigned 3 battalions to the operation. They expected light resistance. Intelligence was wrong. The Hask had reinforced the sector with heavy armor and artillery. What should have been a quick strike turned into a grinding battle. Units got separated. Communication networks failed. The careful plan dissolved into chaos. Han's squad found themselves cut off 15 kilometers behind enemy lines with 2 other squads, 1 Zentari and 1 Gorian. 27 soldiers total, surrounded by hostile territory. With no support coming, the Zentari commander immediately began discussing surrender terms. His species had protocols for such situations. Captivity was acceptable if resistance was futile. The Gorian commander argued for finding a defensive position and waiting for rescue. His people were patient. They could outlast a siege if necessary. Han listened to both, then said, "We complete the mission." "Are you insane?" The Zentari commander asked. "We're cut off, outnumbered. We have wounded. The garrison still needs relief," Han replied. His voice was calm, reasonable. "We're closer to them than any other friendly unit. We have the coordinates. We move at night, avoid contact where possible, and reach them before the Hask realize what we're doing." The Gorian commander shook his head. "That's suicide." "Maybe," Han admitted. "But sitting here is definitely death. The Hask know we're in this area. They'll be hunting us. At least if we're moving toward the garrison, we have a purpose. A goal. Something to accomplish before they find us." Kale watched the other commanders argue. But in the end, human certainty won. Perhaps because the alternative was accepting helplessness. Perhaps because Han made it sound possible. Perhaps because they were all terrified and needed someone to make a decision. They moved at dusk. 27 soldiers, 4 wounded, minimal supplies, crossing hostile territory. Kale kept waiting for someone to voice what they were all thinking. This was madness, but the humans acted like it was normal. Diane took point, navigating by starlight and instinct. Taeyang carried not just his own heavy weapon, but most of the squad's ammunition. Jiwoo rotated through the wounded, checking them constantly, adjusting treatment as they moved. The first night, they covered 8 kilometers. Slow, careful movement through enemy territory. Twice they hid while HASC patrols passed within meters. The tension was unbearable. Kale's hands shook so badly they could barely hold their weapon. But Minho, lying next to Kale in the hiding spot, was breathing slowly and evenly, controlling his fear through simple technique. When the patrol passed, he caught Kale's eye and nodded slightly. "We're okay. We're still moving." The second day, they hid in the ruins of a destroyed settlement. No food left. Water was running low. The wounded were getting worse despite Jiwoo's care. The Zentari soldiers were openly discussing surrender now. The mission was impossible. That afternoon, one of the Gorian soldiers approached Han. "We have to face reality. We're dying out here slowly. If we surrender, at least some of us survive." Han was checking his weapon, methodical and calm. "The garrison has 300 civilians, medical staff, support personnel. If we don't relieve them, the HASC will overrun their position in 3 days. Those people die. So we keep moving. They might already be dead," the Gorian argued. "Then we confirm it. But we don't assume it. We don't quit because things got hard." Kale noticed the human squad hadn't joined the discussion. They were simply preparing for the next movement. Cleaning weapons, redistributing ammunition, helping the wounded prepare to move again, as if there was no question about what came next. That evening, Taeyang sat with Kale during a brief rest. He was exhausted, carrying equipment that would have burdened 3 normal soldiers. But he was smiling slightly. "You're wondering how we do this," he said. "It wasn't a question." Kale nodded. "We've been trained for exactly this situation. When everything goes wrong, when the plan fails, when you're isolated and unsupported, that's when human military culture really shows itself." He adjusted the straps on his heavy weapon. "Other species train for success. We train for failure. We train to keep going after everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. So this is what we prepared for." The second night, they encountered a HASC patrol that couldn't be avoided. The fight was brief and vicious. 3 more wounded. 1 Gorian soldier killed. But they broke through and kept moving. Jiwoo worked on the wounded by dim chemical light, her supplies nearly exhausted. Kale watched her treat a Zentari soldier with a severe leg wound, using the last of their medical foam to stabilize it. "That was for humans," Kale said quietly. "Your own people." Jiwoo didn't look up from her work. "Right now, we're all the same species. We're all soldiers trying to get home. He needs this more than I might need it later." Simple decision. On the third day, morale was breaking. Even some human soldiers were showing signs of strain. They'd been without food for 40 hours. Water was nearly gone. The wounded were slowing them down. Every step was agony. That's when Han called for a rest and gathered everyone in a defensive circle. "I want each person to share one memory from home," he said. "One good thing waiting for you when we get back." The Zentari commander looked confused. "This accomplishes what?" "It reminds us why we keep going," Han replied. "We're not fighting to survive. We're fighting to return to the people and places that matter." "Doyen, you start." Dayan spoke about his mother's cooking, a specific dish she made every birthday. Simple, warm memory. Then Minho talked about his nephew learning to walk. Jiwoo described her favorite bookstore in Seoul. Taeyang talked about wanting to see the ocean again. The other soldiers joined in. Agorian described his bonding mate. Azantari talked about her research project. Each person shared something personal, something real. Kale spoke about the archives on their homeworld, the smell of old records, the quiet satisfaction of discovery. When everyone had shared, the atmosphere had changed. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were people with lives waiting, with reasons beyond duty. Those are the things worth carrying weight for, Han said. Worth pushing through pain for. When you're tempted to quit, think about those memories. Think about making new ones. Then keep moving. They reached the garrison on the 4th night. All 27 soldiers, including the wounded. Impossible, but they had done it anyway. The garrison defenders were shocked to see anyone. They assumed all relief forces had been destroyed. Han's report to the garrison commander was simple. We're here. What do you need? The commander looked at this exhausted, battered group. You crossed 15 kilometers of enemy territory. How? Doyan answered, his voice rough from dehydration. We just kept walking. One step at a time. That's all we needed to do. Just keep taking the next step. Later, as the garrison shared supplies and Jiwoo finally had proper medical equipment to treat the wounded, Kale sat with the human squad. They were eating in silence, too tired for much conversation. You knew it would be like this, Kale said. The training, everything. You knew you'd eventually face a situation exactly like this. Han nodded slowly. Every human soldier knows. Someday, everything will go wrong. Someday, you'll be beyond help, beyond support, beyond what seems possible. That's why we train the way we do. Not for the easy victories, for the impossible ones. For the moments when quitting makes sense and continuing seems insane. We train to choose continuing anyway. Kale finally understood why human casualties were so high. They didn't retreat when any rational analysis said they should. They didn't surrender when survival demanded it. They simply kept moving forward, one impossible step at a time, carrying each other through sheer stubborn refusal to abandon the mission. It was admirable and terrifying in equal measure. Because a species that couldn't be made to quit, that had built an entire culture around enduring the unendurable, was a species that would eventually either save the galaxy or doom it. There would be no middle ground with humans. They simply didn't accept middle ground. The garrison held for 6 more days before relief forces finally broke through the Hask lines. During that time, Kale watched the humans integrate seamlessly into the defense, working alongside species they'd just met as if they'd trained together for years. On the 7th day, intelligence intercepted Hask communications, encoded signals coming from a facility 30 kilometers north. The location matched reports of missing prisoners, civilians taken during the initial invasion, soldiers captured during battles. The garrison commander called a briefing. We've identified a probable Hask detention facility. Given our current strength, we lack resources for a rescue operation. I'm forwarding the coordinates to Coalition Command. They'll send a proper force when available. Han raised his hand. When available means what? Days? Weeks? Possibly 3 to 4 days, the commander admitted. Current priority is securing the evacuation zones. Prisoners are secondary concern. Kale watched Han's expression carefully. Something changed. The professional soldier disappeared, replaced by something harder, colder. Sir, request permission to take a volunteer force on reconnaissance, Han said. His voice was perfectly controlled. We can gather intelligence on the facility. Make the eventual rescue operation easier. The commander hesitated. You just survived 4 days behind enemy lines. Your squad needs rest. With respect, sir, those prisoners don't have 4 days. The Hask don't take prisoners for prisoner exchange. We all know what detention facilities mean. Han's jaw was tight. Let us at least find out what we're dealing with. The commander finally agreed. Reconnaissance only. Gather intelligence and return. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Han assembled a volunteer force. His squad, of course. Some Gorian soldiers who owed them for the relief mission. A few others. 15 soldiers total. Kale went because someone needed to document what happened. They moved out that night. The facility was located in a remote valley, hidden from aerial reconnaissance by artificial terrain features. As they approached, Kale began to smell something wrong. Chemical, biological. The scent of suffering. Duyan on point signaled everyone down. Through enhanced optics, they could see the facility. Large compound. Heavy security. But something was off. The guards seemed relaxed, casual, like they weren't expecting any threat. Arrogant, Minho whispered. They don't think anyone would come out here. Han studied the compound for long minutes. We're going in. Sir, our orders were reconnaissance only, a Gorian soldier said. I've seen enough, Han replied. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. That facility is a war crime in progress. Every minute we wait, people suffer. We have the advantage of surprise. We have the moral obligation. We're going in. The Gorian soldier started to protest, but Jiwoo cut him off. Look at the guard patterns. Look at the facility structure. This isn't a detention center. Look at the medical wing. The research annex. This is something worse. Kale looked through the optics. Jiwoo was right. This wasn't just a prison. This was a facility designed for something else. Something that made Kale's blood run cold. The assault was planned in 15 minutes. Fast, brutal, overwhelming force. Hit the guards before they could alert the main compound. Secure the perimeter. Extract the prisoners. Burn everything else. Kale had seen the humans fight before. But this was different. This wasn't combat. This was execution. Cold, methodical, efficient. They hit the outer guards in synchronized silence. Suppressed weapons. Blade work. No alarms raised. The humans moved like they'd done this 1,000 times. Like violence was a language they spoke fluently. The main compound barely had time to react. Taeyang's heavy weapon shattered the main gate. The squad poured through. No hesitation. No mercy. Every Hask guard died before they could raise a weapon. But when they breached the interior facilities, Kale understood why Han had ignored orders. The detention center was a nightmare. Not just cells, laboratories, medical experimentation rooms, psychological torture chambers. The Hask had been using prisoners for research, testing biological weapons, studying alien physiology through vivisection, breaking minds to understand coalition species' psychological limits. Kale saw things that would scar them forever. A Zentari scientist opened and conscious. Their body used to test regeneration limits. Human civilians in sensory deprivation chambers, kept on the edge of madness. Children from multiple species, in sealed rooms exposed to various toxins to measure tolerance levels. The Hask hadn't just violated the laws of war. They'd violated every principle of sentient dignity. And the humans, seeing this, became something else entirely. Jiwoo moved through the medical wing, her face a mask of controlled fury. She documented everything with her helmet camera while administering emergency treatment to prisoners. Her hands were gentle with the victims, but when a Hask researcher tried to surrender, she put 3 rounds through his skull without breaking stride. Kale watched in shock. He was surrendering. He was conducting experiments on children, Jiwoo replied. Her voice was ice. Some things don't get the privilege of surrender. Diane and Minho cleared the research wing with terrifying efficiency. They weren't just neutralizing threats. They were erasing the facility's ability to function. Every record destroyed. Every researcher killed. Every piece of equipment rendered useless. One HASC officer tried to explain they were just following orders. Minho shot him mid-sentence. Kale found Han in the command center. He was downloading files, documenting evidence, building a war crimes case, even while the battle continued around him. His face was completely blank. Emotion shut down entirely. "This is wrong," Kale said. The words came out weak, uncertain. Han looked up. "Which part? Them doing this? Or us stopping it? The killing. The brutality. You're supposed to be soldiers, not executioners. Or whatever we need to be to protect innocent lives." Han's voice was hollow. These people violated every treaty, every law, every basic principle of sentient rights. They tortured children, Kale. They vivisected prisoners while conscious. They built this entire facility around maximizing suffering for research purposes. So yes, we're being brutal. Because they've earned it. Because someone has to end this. And we're willing to carry that weight. The extraction took 2 hours. Every prisoner who could be moved was evacuated. The facility was rigged with explosives. The evidence was secured for war crimes tribunals. As they withdrew, Kale looked back at the burning compound. Smoke rising into the night sky. Inside, every HASC researcher and guard lay dead. No survivors. No prisoners. Just justice delivered with overwhelming violence. The humans walked in silence. No celebration. No sense of victory. They'd done something necessary and terrible, and they knew it. Kale watched Jiwoo stop to vomit quietly behind a ridge. Watched Doyen's hand shake as he reloaded his weapon. Watched Taeyang sit with his head in his hands. They understood what they'd become. What they'd had to become. And it destroyed something in them even as they accepted its necessity. Back at the garrison, they delivered the rescued prisoners to medical care. The freed captives cried, thanked them, blessed them as heroes. The humans accepted none of it. They simply filed their reports and asked for new assignments. Kale confronted Han one final time. "How do you live with this? With being capable of such violence?" Han was cleaning his weapon, methodical and thorough. He didn't look up. "You think we're the horror? We didn't build that facility. We didn't torture innocents. We didn't conduct experiments on children. The HASC did that. We're just the horror that responds. The nightmare that monsters need to fear. Because somebody has to be willing to become terrible to stop terrible things. Somebody has to carry that darkness so others don't have to. And we chose to be that somebody." He finally met Kale's eyes. "Yeah, we'll do brutal things. We'll cross lines other species won't. We'll become monsters when necessary. Because the alternative is letting real monsters operate without fear. Is letting innocents suffer because we wanted to keep our hands clean. We chose dirty hands over clear conscience. That's what it means to be human in war." Kale had no response. Because Han was right. The humans had stopped something unspeakable. Had saved lives. Had delivered justice to those who would never face any other kind. But the cost was written on every human face. They'd saved their souls by sacrificing pieces of them. They'd done the right thing by doing terrible things. They'd won by losing parts of themselves they'd never get back. And somehow, impossibly, they were ready to do it again if needed. Because humans had decided long ago that some things mattered more than staying clean. Some things were worth becoming monsters to protect. That was the real horror. Not what humans could do, but that they chose to do it, eyes open, fully aware of the cost, and called it duty. The war ended 3 weeks later. Not because either side achieved total victory, but because the evidence from the research facility changed everything. Coalition member species, seeing what the HASC were capable of, united in ways they never had before. The HASC, facing overwhelming force and war crimes tribunals, sued for peace. Han's squad returned to base as heroes. Medals were awarded. Promotions offered. News services called them saviors. But Kale watched the humans deflect every compliment, refuse every interview, avoid every celebration. They just wanted to be left alone. Kale noticed the small changes first. Minho's hands shook when he thought no one was watching. Violent tremors he couldn't control. He developed a habit of counting things over and over. Ammunition, steps, breaths. Like he needed the numbers to prove he was still in control of something. Taeyang stopped talking. He'd always been quiet, but now he went entire days without speaking. He'd carry out duties perfectly, respond when directly addressed, but the easy camaraderie was gone. Replaced by silence and distance, Doyen couldn't sleep. Kale found him on watch duty at night even when he wasn't assigned. When asked, he'd just shrug and say he wasn't tired. But the exhaustion in his eyes told a different truth. Sleep meant dreams. Dreams meant remembering. Better to stay awake. Jiwoo seemed the most functional, but Kale caught her writing letters. Dozens of them. To families of soldiers who hadn't made it back. To families of prisoners they'd rescued. To families of prisoners who died before rescue came. She wrote in careful script, trying to find words that could somehow make loss bearable. Knowing no words could, only Han seemed unchanged on the surface. Still professional. Still efficient. Still the perfect soldier. But Kale had learned to read the small signs. The way he paused before entering rooms. The way his eyes constantly scanned for threats that weren't there. The way he never fully relaxed, even in complete safety. They were breaking. Slowly, quietly, but breaking nonetheless. The medical staff called it combat stress, trauma, expected response to extended operations. They offered treatment, counseling, medication. The humans accepted none of it. They just kept working, kept training, kept preparing for the next deployment that might never come. Kale filed their report to Varan Command. Pages of observations, analysis, conclusions. But the core message was simple. Never fight humans. Never fight without humans. And never ask them to do what you're unwilling to do yourself. Humans don't just fight wars. They internalize them. Every battle becomes part of who they are. Every decision carries weight they never put down. They're not better soldiers because they're fearless or ruthless. They're better because they understand the cost and pay it anyway. The recommendation at the end was stark. If humanity ever turns hostile, surrender immediately. Because these people had built an entire civilization around the ability to endure suffering and still function. They'd made trauma survivable through preparation and brotherhood. They turned psychological damage into fuel for continued operation. And that made them unstoppable. One evening, a week before Kale's scheduled return to Varan space, Han gathered the squad for a meal. Not in the base cafeteria. A small restaurant in a nearby settlement. Civilian clothes. No rank. Just people sharing food. Kale was invited. It felt significant, though they didn't know why. The meal was simple. Korean food from Han's home region. Jiwoo had cooked, using recipes her grandmother taught her. The squad ate slowly, savoring flavors that connected them to something beyond war. To the ones who didn't make it back, Han said, raising a glass. The others echoed the toast. Kale noticed they spoke specific names, remembered specific people. Every loss was personal, carried individually. After the meal, as they sat in comfortable silence, Taeyang spoke for the first time in days. I'm getting out. After this tour. Going home. Going to see the ocean like I said I would. No one seemed surprised. Minho nodded. Yeah, me too. Promised my nephew I'd teach him to fish. Time to keep that promise. Diane looked down at his hands. I don't know if I can go back to civilian life. Don't know if I remember how to be anything except this. You'll learn, Jiwoo said gently. We all will. We carry what we've done. We carry who we've lost. But we also carry each other. That's how we survive after the war ends. Same way we survived during it. Together. Han listened to his squad, his face showing rare emotion. Pride mixed with sorrow. You all did good. Better than good. You became exactly what you needed to be when it mattered. Now you get to become something else. Something better. Something that honors what you survived by living well. He turned to Kale. We're not heroes. We did terrible things. Necessary things, maybe, but terrible. We broke rules. Crossed lines. Became monsters when the situation demanded it. And we'll carry that forever. That's the price of being human in war. We remember. We carry. We live with what we've done. Kale finally understood. Humans didn't survive war better than other species because they were stronger or braver. They survived because they'd accepted that survival had a cost. That doing the right thing sometimes meant doing terrible things. That protecting innocence sometimes required losing your own. And somehow, despite everything, they remained human. Damaged, traumatized, carrying wounds that would never fully heal. But human. Still capable of friendship. Still capable of kindness. Still capable of choosing to be better, even when they've been forced to be worse. Before Kale left, Han pulled them aside. I want you to have something. He handed over a small patch. The squad insignia. A simple design, but meaningful. The phrase on it is Korean. Gaki Gapsita. It means let's go together. That's the core of human military culture. We don't ask anyone to go anywhere alone. We don't let anyone carry weight they can't handle by themselves. We go together. We carry together. We survive together, or we don't survive at all. He met Kale's eyes. You went together with us. You carried weight when you could have refused. You didn't quit even when things got impossible. That makes you one of us. Not human by species, but human in the way that matters. You chose to keep going. Kale accepted the patch, understanding its significance. This wasn't just a souvenir. It was recognition, acceptance, a statement that Kale had proven something important. What happens now? Kale asked. Han smiled slightly. We heal, or we try to. We remember. We carry what we did and who we lost. And we try to build lives worth the price we paid for them. That's all we can do. That's all anyone can do after war. Live in a way that honors the cost. The transport home gave Kale time to think, to process everything witnessed, to understand what they'd learned. Humans were terrifying. Not because they were violent, though they were. Not because they were ruthless, though they could be. They were terrifying because they'd looked at war's horror, at trauma's cost, at violence's price, and decided those things were bearable if the cause was just. They built an entire culture around enduring the unendurable, around functioning after breaking, around staying human even when forced to be monstrous. They'd made suffering survivable through preparation, brotherhood, and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. And they'd done it while maintaining compassion, while remembering why they fought, while honoring both their enemy's humanity and their own. That was the real lesson. The thing other species missed. Humans weren't better at war because they didn't feel its cost. They were better because they felt it completely and chose to pay it anyway. Because some things mattered more than staying safe. Some things were worth becoming damaged to protect. Kale wore the squad patch on their uniform when they reported to Varan Command. Wore it during the debriefing. Wore it when presenting findings and recommendations. The final line of the report was simple. If humanity fights beside you, you'll probably survive. If humanity fights against you, you probably won't. But more importantly, if humanity fights with you, you'll learn what it truly means to refuse surrender, to choose duty over safety, to become whatever you need to be to protect what matters. They're not perfect soldiers. They're damaged, traumatized, carrying costs that will never fully heal. But they're still human, still capable of kindness after violence, still capable of hope after horror, still capable of choosing to be better even after being forced to be worse. That's not just impressive. That's transcendent. And that's why, when the next war comes, every species should hope humanity chooses to fight beside them. Because these people have mastered the art of remaining human in situations designed to destroy humanity. And that might be the most important skill in the universe. Kale kept in contact with the squad over the following years. Taeng sent pictures from the coast. Minho shared stories of teaching his nephew. Daeon eventually found peace working with other veterans, helping them transition back to civilian life. Jiwoo became a doctor, treating refugees and trauma survivors. Han stayed in. Someone had to train the next generation. Someone had to teach them how to carry weight, how to refuse to quit, how to stay human even in the worst situations. He was good at it, patient and understanding in ways only someone who'd survived could be. They all carried scars, but they carried them forward, chose to build lives that honored what they'd survived, chose to be human in the fullest sense, not just surviving, but living, not just enduring, but growing.